The last days of King Solomon, rise, fall, and regret. King Solomon was known as the wisest man who ever lived, blessed by God with unmatched wisdom, staggering wealth, and immense power. But what really happened to this great king? How did a man so favored by God end his life in despair, regret, and spiritual ruin? Join us as we uncover the untold story of Solomon's final days, a story filled with reflections on his glory, his downfalls, and the tragic consequences of turning away from God. Discover how a king who had everything ended up saying everything is meaningless. And most importantly, what does his story mean for us today? Stay with us until the end to uncover the powerful lessons from Solomon's life that can still transform ours. What can we learn from his mistakes? How can we avoid the traps that led him astray? This isn't just the story of a king. It's the story of anyone who has ever struggled with pride, temptation, and the pull of worldly desires. If you find this story inspiring and eye-opening, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support helps us bring more powerful biblical stories and life-changing lessons straight to you. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear what stood out most to you about Solomon's journey. The rise of Solomon. Solomon began his reign with incredible promise. He was the son of David and Bathsheba, chosen by God to ascend the throne after David's reign. From the beginning, his journey was marked by divine favor. In 1 Kings 3:5, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream, saying, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." Instead of wealth, long life, or victory over enemies, Solomon humbly asked in 1 Kings 3:9, "Give your servant an understanding heart to govern your people and to discern between good and evil." God was pleased with his request. In response, he gave Solomon unmatched wisdom, along with riches, honor, and the promise of a long life, if Solomon remained faithful. His wisdom was soon tested. Two women came before him, both claiming to be the mother of the same child. Solomon declared the child should be divided in two, knowing the true mother would rather give him up than see him harmed. This judgment amazed the nation, proving that God's wisdom was truly with him. From that moment, Solomon's fame spread far and wide. The Queen of Sheba herself traveled from a distant land to test him with hard questions. After witnessing his wisdom and wealth, she confessed in 1 Kings 10:7, "Indeed, not even half was told me. In wisdom and wealth you have far exceeded the report I heard." But Solomon's greatest achievement was building the temple in Jerusalem, a house for the Lord that became the spiritual heart of Israel. When it was dedicated, the glory of God filled the temple like a cloud, confirming his presence among his people. Under Solomon, Israel reached the height of wealth, power, and influence. Silver was so common it was considered of little value. Kings and rulers from all nations came to hear his wisdom. Truly, he had it all. The fall of King Solomon. At the height of his reign, Solomon stood as the wealthiest, wisest, and most powerful king Israel had ever known. The world marveled at his wisdom. Foreign rulers traveled across deserts just to hear his counsel. The Queen of Sheba herself declared that not even half of his greatness had been told. His throne, overlaid with gold and guarded by lions, symbolized unmatched glory. Silver was as common as stones in Jerusalem, and the temple he built for the Lord gleamed with splendor that took the breath away. But behind the walls of Solomon's palace, a quiet fracture began to spread. The scriptures tell us that Solomon loved many foreign women: Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites, women from nations that the Lord had warned Israel never to marry. God's command was clear: "You shall not intermarry with them, for they will surely turn your hearts after their gods." Yet Solomon, despite his wisdom, chose to follow his desire. One wife led to another and then another, until Solomon had gathered 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. What began as a matter of politics and pleasure soon became a matter of idolatry. For love of them, Solomon permitted shrines and altars to be built across the hills of Israel, not for the Lord, but for the gods of his wives: Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians; Moloch, the abomination of the Ammonites; Chemosh of Moab. And then came the unthinkable. Solomon himself bowed his head in worship at these altars. The king who once knelt before the Ark of the Covenant in the temple of the living God now bent his knees to idols carved by human hands. The man who once prayed, "There is no God like you in heaven above or on earth below," allowed his heart to be divided. The decline of Solomon was not sudden. It was slow, subtle, like a mighty tree eaten away from within by termites. His wisdom remained, but his devotion weakened. His wealth increased, but his spiritual strength drained away. His throne stood tall, but his heart sank low. And so the anger of the Lord burned against Solomon. The God who had twice appeared to him, once in Gibeon and again in Jerusalem, declared judgment. As the years passed, King Solomon, the man once celebrated as the wisest on earth, began to feel the weight of his choices pressing upon him. The glory of his youth had faded, and though his throne was still secure, his heart was not. He had ruled Israel for 4 decades. His reign had begun with promise, with the temple standing as a gleaming testimony to God's presence among his people. He had once prayed with tears in his eyes, dedicating that temple, asking God to hear the prayers of his people and forgive them when they turned back. In those days, Solomon was humble. He depended on God. He was a man after wisdom, not riches. But as he grew older, something changed. The splendor of his kingdom, the wealth pouring in from every direction, and the political alliances he forged through marriage to foreign princesses began to shift his devotion. Instead of leading Israel to remain faithful to the Lord, Solomon allowed himself to be swayed by the gods of the nations around him. His palace grew filled with wives, 700 of royal birth and 300 concubines. Many of these women came from nations God had forbidden Israel to intermarry with, not because of race or politics, but because their hearts clung to idols. And exactly as God had warned, their influence slowly turned Solomon's heart. In his later years, Solomon was no longer the young king who had boldly asked God for wisdom. He was a man divided, kneeling not only before the God of Israel, but also bowing in shrines he had built for the gods of Sidon, Moab, and Ammon. High places for Chemosh and Molech rose on the hills around Jerusalem, their altars smoking with sacrifices that God had called abominations. The Lord was angry with Solomon. Twice God had appeared to him, once when he granted him wisdom, and again when he dedicated the temple. Both times God had warned him clearly, "If you walk before me faithfully, I will establish your throne forever. But if you or your descendants turn away from me, this house I have consecrated will be cast out of my sight." Solomon knew the warning, yet he ignored it. And so in his final days, instead of peace, trouble began to rise in his kingdom. Enemies appeared where before there had been none. Hadad the Edomite, who had fled as a boy during David's conquests, returned to Edom and became a thorn in Solomon's side. Rezon of Damascus, who had escaped from King David's generals, stirred up opposition in the north, ruling over Aram and hating Israel all his days. But the greatest threat was not from outside, it was from within. Among Solomon's own officials was a young man named Jeroboam, industrious and favored. Solomon had placed him in charge of the labor force of the tribes of Joseph. But God had other plans for him. One day, the prophet Ahijah met Jeroboam on a road outside Jerusalem. Taking a new cloak, Ahijah tore it into 12 pieces. "Take 10, he said to Jeroboam, "for the Lord will tear the kingdom from Solomon's hand. Yet for the sake of David, his servant, he will leave one tribe for Solomon's son, so that a lamp may always burn in Jerusalem." When word of this reached Solomon, fear replaced wisdom. Instead of repenting before God, Solomon sought to kill Jeroboam. But Jeroboam fled to Egypt, remaining there until Solomon's death. And so, the king who once judged with righteousness now ended his reign in unrest. His palace echoed not with songs of praise, but with whispers of rebellion. The man once admired by queens and rulers for his wisdom now stood as a warning. Even the wisest can fall if they turn from the Lord. Solomon died after reigning 40 years in Jerusalem. He was buried in the city of David, laid to rest beside his father. But his kingdom was no longer whole. His choices had fractured it, and his legacy was stained by compromise. When Rehoboam, his son, took the throne, the cracks became breaks. The once golden kingdom of Israel was torn in two, just as God had said. And so the story of Solomon ends not in triumph, but in tragedy. His life reminds us that wisdom is not enough if the heart is divided. The same man who wrote, "Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man," struggled to live by those very words. The final days of Solomon are a sobering picture. A man who had everything, wealth, power, wisdom, honor, but lost his devotion to the God who gave it all. When history remembers King Solomon, it does not merely recall the reign of a man, it reflects on the rise and fall of a kingdom, the glory of wisdom, and the sobering cost of drifting away from God. Solomon's legacy is a tapestry woven with both brilliance and brokenness, blessings and burdens, triumphs and tragedies. At the height of his reign, Solomon's wisdom was unparalleled. Leaders from distant nations, such as the Queen of Sheba, traveled across deserts to witness his brilliance firsthand. His ability to render justice, compose proverbs, and discern the mysteries of life elevated Israel to a level of respect it had never known before. His words in Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Songs still echo through time, offering insight into human nature, love, labor, vanity, and the fear of the Lord. In this sense, Solomon's legacy is not confined to his own era. His wisdom continues to guide and challenge generations thousands of years later. Solomon's greatest earthly achievement was undoubtedly the construction of the temple in Jerusalem, a masterpiece of faith and craftsmanship. This was no ordinary building. It was the house of the Lord, the central place of worship for Israel. For centuries, the temple stood as the heart of Jewish spiritual life, the dwelling place of God's glory among His people. Its influence was so profound that even when destroyed, rebuilt, and eventually desecrated, the idea of the temple remained central to Jewish faith and identity. To this day, the Western Wall, a remnant of Solomon's temple platform, remains one of the holiest sites in the world. Economically and politically, Solomon transformed Israel into a regional powerhouse. His alliances brought peace for most of his reign, and his trade routes filled the nation's treasury. He elevated Israel from a tribal kingdom to a respected empire. Yet his immense wealth became both a blessing and a curse. It gave the people prosperity, but also fostered discontent when heavy taxes and forced labor became too burdensome. Thus, Solomon's legacy is complex. He left behind a kingdom stronger than his father David received, but also one fragile and divided, ready to fracture after his death. Spiritually, Solomon's legacy is equally dual in nature. In his early years, he was a model of humility, asking God not for riches or long life, but for wisdom to govern well. God granted his request, and through this, Solomon shone as a beacon of divine favor. But as he grew older, his heart strayed. He allowed the influence of foreign wives and the seduction of idolatry to corrupt his devotion. This spiritual compromise became the turning point, leaving behind a warning for all future generations. No amount of wisdom, success, or blessing can replace wholehearted obedience to God. In literature, Solomon's voice continues to speak. The Proverbs call us to practical godly living. Ecclesiastes, often seen as his reflection in later life, shows the futility of worldly pursuits without God. And the Song of Songs celebrates the beauty of love and intimacy. These writings are part of Solomon's enduring gift to humanity, a legacy of words that outlive palaces and empires. The ultimate legacy of Solomon is a paradox. On one hand, he is remembered as the wisest king who ever lived, the builder of the temple, the poet of divine wisdom, and the ruler who brought Israel into its golden age. On the other hand, he is also remembered for his divided heart, his pursuit of excess, and his failure to remain faithful to the very God who gave him everything. And so, the story of Solomon becomes a mirror. For the ambitious, it is a reminder that success without God is hollow. For the wise, it is a caution that knowledge without obedience leads to folly. For the faithful, it is encouragement that even imperfect lives can leave lasting good when surrendered to God. In the end, Solomon's legacy is not just about what he built or what he wrote. It is about the lesson his life teaches. His glory rose like the sun at dawn, shone in brilliance at noon, and dimmed in the evening. Yet even in the fading light, his story points us to the truth. Only God's wisdom, only God's kingdom, and only God's faithfulness endure forever. When we look back on the life of King Solomon, we see a man whose story is filled with both brilliance and sorrow. His wisdom, wealth, and power were unmatched, and yet his later years serve as a sobering reminder of the fragility of human devotion. Reflection 1. True wisdom is rooted in God. Solomon reminds us that wisdom is not simply knowledge or intelligence. It is the understanding that every gift, every opportunity, every success comes from God. Early in his life, Solomon sought wisdom above riches, and God blessed him abundantly. His life teaches us that when we place God first, our decisions, relationships, and even our achievements can be guided by clarity and insight. Reflection 2. Worldly pursuits are fleeting. Solomon's later years highlight the emptiness of pursuing wealth, pleasure, and power without a heart devoted to God. Even all the treasures of Israel could not fill the spiritual void that grew within him. His words in Ecclesiastes echo through time. Meaningless, everything is meaningless. This challenges us to consider our own lives. Are we chasing what truly matters, or are we distracted by temporary pleasures? Reflection 3. Choices have consequences. Despite his wisdom, Solomon allowed compromise to creep into his life. His alliances, marriages, and tolerance of idolatry had long-lasting consequences, affecting not only himself, but the nation of Israel. His story reminds us that our choices, small or great, can shape the legacy we leave behind. Reflection 4. Redemption is always possible. Even in his final reflections, Solomon turned back to the truth. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. No matter how far one strays, acknowledging God and seeking his guidance can restore perspective and purpose. His life encourages us to return to God before it's too late. Solomon's story is not just ancient history, it is a mirror for our own lives. Ask yourself today, are you seeking wisdom from God or from the world? Are your pursuits meaningful or are they fleeting? Are your choices building a legacy of faith, love, and obedience? Take a moment to reflect, pray, and commit your heart to what truly matters. Seek God first in your decisions, treasure what is eternal, and let your life leave a legacy that honors Him. If you found Solomon's story inspiring, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a lesson from God's Word. Share this video with your friends and family, and leave a comment below. What lesson from Solomon's life spoke to you the most? Remember, true wisdom and lasting fulfillment are found not in wealth, power, or pleasure, but in a life devoted to God. Let Solomon's life guide you, inspire you, and challenge you to stay faithful until the very end.